Yeah, that's pretty cool to know that you are familiar with killer clowns.
Of
Um,
course.
is there any other
I'm
horror?
familiar with many of them.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, is there anything like that you grew up watching? Like, obviously, you're kind of known at this point, for your horror films. What did you grow up watching to kind of get you these types of roles, or was this something you always kind of sought out, or did it just kind of happen like this?
Kind of both. So it's interesting that you asked that because I didn't intend on targeting horror. It just kind of happened. I just kind of fell into it. But at the same time, I have always loved horror movies and I have been watching them pretty much my whole life since before I probably should have been, which I feel like a lot of horror fans can relate to in hindsight. I
Yeah.
mean, my favorite of all time is John Carpenter's The Thing. That's my absolute favorite horror movie. It's so good. It really stands the test of time. And honestly, the original Blair Witch was one of the original ones that really got me into horror in general because I remember just being. I mean, I think in the ways we all were right about how much the genre changed when this like found footage broke onto the scene and also the way that they marketed it where
Yeah.
they had the like sort of meta marketing campaign where you didn't know what was real and what wasn't, and I had never seen films sort of seep into reality in that way. So I remember that like blew my little baby mind.
Awesome. Yeah, like I'm a huge fan of Blair Witch.
Yeah.
I don't really get nervous about interviews just because I do this so often, but anytime I talk to someone from that franchise just because like how much it meant to me,
Oh yeah.
that's one that kind of sticks out is like I get a little nervous when someone has worked on that or was in that. So we have
Totally.
that connection. I also wanted to mention before because I absolutely loved this film. I thought it was really, really clever. But
Thank
I
you.
do want to mention since you like the thing,
Yes.
if you haven't seen it, I would suggest the most recent season of True Detective. It's
Okay.
it has very similar like tone and nods. Like there's other
Ooh.
things that it feels like, but the thing in particular, I think that uh it kind of leans into that quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you. That's good. No, I've seen the first season and I haven't kept up since then, but I have heard good things about this most recent one. And obviously Jodie Foster
Yep.
is a goddess among men. So like I needn't hear more. I'm on board.
Yeah,
Appreciate that.
it's funny you mentioned that in particular because my wife and I had only seen season one, and then we
Yeah.
watched season four, and then we're like, well, I guess we better go back and watch the other two. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe you'll have a similar adventure as we did.
Probably.
So yeah, Faceless After Dark, fantastic film. I thought it was one of the more clever productions and kind of storylines. I work at production myself, so to
Oh,
kind of
cool.
like go along the ride with your character it was really interesting to kind of to do that. Um, can you kind of dive into like the theme of parasocial relationships and the dark side of fame in the digital age? What inspired you guys to kind of take that on? It's a really interesting topic, and I thought you guys handled it really well.
Thank you. And obviously, a huge part of the credit for that goes to the director Raymond Wood, who also did so much of the post production himself, because I really feel like he did a good job of putting you into the mindset of the character and putting you as the audience member into the Bowie's POV. Uh, I yeah, I mean, part of where that came from is that if you're already mentally unstable or already dealing with mental illness or any sort of neurodivergence, it's kind of a perfect storm to then be walking around with a computer in your pocket when really we're very complicated apes who should be eating berries in a cave, and like our brains and our bodies have evolved at different rates. And it's uh, in some ways, Ray and I actually have different views on social media. He's very opposed. He's not on social media at all. And I do think social media can be a really incredible, beautiful thing because it does bring people together. It creates community, it helps people organize, it opens people's minds in a lot of ways. But the flip side of that coin, like anything we create, is that it also can be very dangerous. And it's allowed all of us this sort of sense of anonymity and familiarity at the same time of like I can say something to someone behind a mask, so to speak, and not have to deal with the consequences of their action of my own actions. in the way that I would if I were to say something to someone's face. And a lot of people feel safe behind that to use that as a weapon in a lot of ways. And at the same time, it creates a familiarity in the way that it makes it feel like we know people who we really have never met. And again, some ways that's beautiful. Like I have some friends that are just my like online friends or friends that I met one time and we've just kept in touch that way. And that's really cool. But at the same time, we have to check ourselves sometimes and remember that this feeling of looking at someone's life every day and peeking into their lives, we're actually still removed and we're only seeing what they're showing us, and it's still a very curated experience, and it's hard to remind ourselves of that. And then, you know, the comment I made about us being like meant to eat berries in a cave, it's cool that we can know what's going on all over the world at any given moment, but that's also incredibly crippling sometimes, like to know about all the horrible things that are happening everywhere all the time, constantly. And if you're already sort of on the precipice of your own sanity, then I think it wouldn't take much to push someone over the edge.
Yeah, it's kind of going off of that, honestly, is you know, you like your character, but I'm sure a little bit of you as well, you know, because you're in
Yeah.
these films, you constantly are objectified, you're harassed, and then kind of like you were touching on there, you know, there's this familiarity, you know, between your fans and, you know, doing conventions and things. I'm sure that that's exhausting in its own right, and it's not necessarily something you want to, you know, navigate just for fun. Did was that as demanding as I assume it would be to kind of get into the mindset of this particular role? Because those are the worst aspects of probably your real life. And then to kind of have to do that on camera and then turn it off and on, you know, how did you prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly aspects of Bowie that do come from my real life and do come from things I've experienced. And then obviously there are a lot of things like the murder, I feel the need to say, that are fictionalized versions of real life and not so much from reality. And it was important to me to show, like with the convention scene, that most of the people I engage with who support my work, 90% of them are amazing, supportive, lovely, like a really cool community. And then there's the 10%, you know, and those are the ones that are shown in the film. So I wanted to make that super clear. And that's an interesting question that you ask in terms of stepping in and out of it and preparing for that sort of thing. There are there are certain scenes that were easy to tap into because I felt like they were versions of myself or inspired by pieces of myself, and those are easier to step into because they were either just already a truth that I was living or am adjacent to, or they were sort of a catharsis for things that I maybe wish I could react to that I can't in real life, and that element was very cathartic. And then, you know, scenes like the long take at the end where I'm looking at the camera, that one in particular, yes, that was very exhausting because I'm running the gamut of someone unraveling and becoming unhinged, and that's much harder to get into and come out of. But in a lot of ways, it was still cathartic, and it was important to me to add to the story in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely jumps off the screen. And you know, considering the co-writing as well as leading,
Yeah.
how did you kind of navigate the balance, you know, in you know, between portraying the violence and ensuring that the focus remained on the emotional journey of the characters? Like, because yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, movement in this film per se, you know, murder, like you
Yeah.
said, but at the same time, there is this huge like there's a lot of growth, and not only from your character but just kind of like everyone, even the viewer. So how did you kind of instill that or like make sure that that was still you know, alive by the end?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that had to do with the trust that I have in Ray as a director, because you're right, it is a tricky sort of balance to maintain. So we basically did a ton of work on the script before I even got to my prep as an actor or my work as an actor and a stunt performer. So we did a ton of work on the script so that we were really locked in on the same page before we ever started. And then I tried my best to leave the writer's hat off once we actually started filming.
Makes
And obviously
sense.
there were times where I like came up with dialogue on the fly or could kind of, you know, I wanted to make sure I wasn't overstepping into Ray's lane because I was trusting his vision and I knew that he had a really strong one. But there were times where other actors would ask me about dialogue things or where we would kind of have to brainstorm, problem solve things together. Ray and I, or myself and the other actors, or all of us as a team. And then I would kind of put my producer writer hat back on for a little bit. But I tried as much as possible to, once we were filming, to just focus on telling the truth as an actor and being present.
Awesome. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. You touched on it a little bit about the convention scene, and your character Bowie is burdened with like kind of like a niche fame and objectification. Was
Yeah.
there any personal like experiences or research that informed your portrayal of her struggles? Like, did you take from anything from you or friends or other actors or actresses maybe that because I felt that that scene felt so real. And I know that it's something you do encounter quite a bit, but at the same time, it I was immediately engaged because of that.
Thank you. I mean, that's the goal. So I'm really happy to hear that. And like you said, it kind of came from a little bit of everything. I think everything that when we anyone who creates any sort of content or anyone who's an artist, you take from everything you experience and your life informs your art and yourself informs your art, whether you intend it to or not. So I think it's always a strength to lean into that. And I certainly leaned into, I do uh, live with depression and anxiety myself. And so I could absolutely tap into that of, what if I were a little less secure, or what if I were in a different circumstance than I am, or what if I were who I am, but I didn't have the support system around me that I do, because I think that is one of the biggest challenges is finding community. And really, one of the things, to go back to the social media conversation that we were having earlier, it's hard when you're constantly being looked at but you don't feel like you're being seen. And that's a huge theme of the film, and of what one of the things we were trying to say. So I definitely took from my own struggles in terms of mental illness. I definitely took from certain things that have happened. Like I did have a stalker scare a couple years ago, and I have had some uncomfortable conversations or interactions on sets and not on sets. And again, most of my experiences have been positive, but then there have been a number that have been more challenging or uncomfortable or even dangerous. So I drew from those certainly, and from experiences that other people that I know in the industry have, and having those influence the script and my character as well. And then in terms of other actors' performances, I was really drawing on, there's a genre of film where you watch the protagonist become the antagonist by the end of the film. And I really wanted to make a version of that, but I had only ever seen that done with men. And there are excellent examples of it, but I definitely wanted to draw from those, like American Psycho, of course. Taxi Driver is my favorite example. King of Comedy, Joker, movies like that.
That's odd. Yeah, I'm actually in my office right now, and I have a huge movie theater like Joker poster here, and I just had a conversation about a Taxi Driver, King of Comedy. So I totally get what you're saying. Those are some of my favorite films, and
Yeah,
yeah, I could get what you're saying, like because you're right. There's no representation in for women in those types of genres. Like there is, but they're often like not like award-winning films or films we talk about often.
right,
Yeah, so there's a
right.
spot.
And
Um,
I wanted it to be, I didn't want it to be just a crazy woman trope, because that's not helpful necessarily, because that's not how we frame those movies that we were just talking about. It's a descent into madness. I guess that's the best description for that subgenre that we're talking about. I mean, you could argue, you could even put The Godfather in that category, because you're watching someone who is resisting their fate, resisting their path, resisting everything that life is trying to throw at them. And by the end of the film, spoiler alert for anyone who somehow hasn't seen The Godfather by now, but by the end of the film, he's fully given into it, and he lets himself become this monster. And it's a more subtle transition, but I would put it in the same category.
It's again, it's very odd that you mentioned that too, because I was just talking about Coppola's new trailer just dropped. So
Yeah.
it's like you're around here. But but
I'm in your house.
yeah,
It's
but
very meta.
I yeah, exactly. Just like Faceless After Dark. And I do also want to mention, and I think that there's another conversation here that we're kind of jumping around. Um, the treatment of actors, particularly within these niche genres. Like, I have friends that work on these films, and like you said, there is odd conversations, and it kind of goes back to that social network thing. Like, if you friend me on Facebook, you know I should get a free 8 by 10 because like, for friends. um
Right.
I find that so odd, and as someone that like sees it often, it
Yeah.
makes me feel weird and uncomfortable. And I was that, was there some idea, like maybe some sort of commentary that you wanted to add, having those scenes in the film, and maybe like, hey, we are friends, but I'm still a working actor.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, and I'm sure that there are versions of this in every industry, but this is the one that I know. So it's the one that got infused into this. But there absolutely is that. It's hard when we sort of view people through a lens of commodification, and when we treat our relationships as transactional. And it's a really thin line to toe when you want to be moving forward in your career and you're working with the people that you're also friends with, and vice versa. So, I mean, I've definitely experienced it. I've definitely seen it. And, boundaries are hard, and there really isn't a one right way to hold them or to create them with people, but they're so important. And yeah, I mean, and it's tough because I do want, like, I like the accessibility that we create with like our networks and with the internet in a lot of ways is very cool, because when you see, me talking about something, you know that it's actually coming from me
Mhm.
rather than, from a firm or something like that. Uh and yeah, and but at the same time, like, it doesn't mean that we're, gonna like have a sleepover. Like, there, it's a spectrum, like,
Yeah.
and I think that we should be okay with what our relationships look like, and not making people feel like we're just trying to get something out of them or use them for something. And a lot of times too, I mean, I kind of touch on this in the, or we kind of touch on this in the film with her friend Ryan. It's this sort of thing of there are power dynamics, and whether we want them to or not, those power dynamics can influence our working relationships and our friendships, especially when they go unacknowledged.
Yeah, you mentioned Ryan. That's exactly kind of where I was going with that. It,
Nice.
it was a very clever addition to the story, and I thought it was really
Thank you.
interesting how you guys kind of put him in, take him out. Like, it was really a nice little vehicle, or like a transition from one character to another. So yeah, perfect writing, great stuff. And
Thank you.
yeah, I couldn't be more happy about that, as far as his character goes. I want to also ask, about, other people in the industry, not, I guess, if you have any advice for not being pigeonholed or
Yeah,
objectified, because you do have kind of a diverse filmography, but you're beginning to kind of go down this road of horror. But I mean, Terrifier was a huge hit. I don't think anyone predicted it to be as big as it
I
was.
certainly did not.
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny because I had seen it like years before it was on Netflix, and then it just kind of blew up. But, stepping away from Terrifier, moving forward, we touched on this right when we jumped into the call, but do you want to continue doing horror, or is it just kind of like, I'll take what I can get. I want a good role. I want to do as much as I can.
I love horror, and I intend to continue doing it and other things. That's how I feel, is that I if it's a really good role, if it's a good, director, if it's a cool story, then that's ultimately what matters. And I think that applies across genres. I mean, I have done work in other genres as well already, even if it hasn't popped off in the weird way that the Terrifier has. I love that you saw it before Netflix. You're like one of the OGs. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But then I've also done, one of the ways that I worked to brand myself outside of that was all the physical training I've done and all the stunt training I've done. And I always do my own stunts and everything. And so now I'm getting to do a lot more in the action space, which is really exciting. Like I have one of the two leads in an action movie that we're filming in the fall. And I have a small role in Bad Boys 4, which comes out this summer. And so the short answer is that I love horror and I want to continue doing it. And I'm also really grateful to work in other genres because it's really, as long as the work is meaningful and the team is solid, then and the check clears. That's, I suppose that's also important too.
Yeah, like with this film, did you do the stunt coordinating as well, or was it like a team effort? Because, for a horror film, there was quite a bit of action in this. And that was one of my notes for the review actually is like there's an odd amount of fight sequences and they look
Yeah.
they look legit. So is that you?
Thank you. I'm so happy that they come across that way. It was a team effort, like you said. I performed all of my own stunts, but the actual stunt coordination was Brent Bernhard. He was our stunt coordinator, and he was in charge of choreographing the stunts and making sure everything was safe, and making sure our use of weaponry was done safely and carefully. And so he was in charge of choreographing the dance, but then everyone who you see doing physical movement in the film is actually the one doing it. We didn't have any doubles.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's
Thanks.
it was fun because it definitely looked that way, which I can appreciate as a viewer. Stepping away from the acting, putting back on the writer's hat, is
Yeah.
is is that, to kind of, and this kind of mimics your character as well. Do you see yourself continuing to write roles for yourself, or are you gonna just maybe write something and put it out and try to get that, made as well?
All the above. I mean, I've written a number of short projects that I've directed and not been in. I, for the first time, wrote and directed something that I was also in at the same time last year, which comes out later this year, called Spray Bottle. It's a short action comedy.
Cool.
So ultimately, I love all the above. I mean, there are projects that I love doing because they're ideas I never would have thought of. And then at the same time, I am writing two features right now, and love writing for myself, but I also do love writing things that I might just direct or might just hand off, and let someone else take and just work as the writer. I love writing in general, so I could see it going in any or all of those paths.
Was it always the goal, or like did you go to school for any of this in particular, or did it just kind of happen?
So I've been writing and telling stories ever since I was a kid. Even before I could write, I was like playing in corners with little animal figurines and telling stories with them. And then I actually got a writing scholarship to a school, to a university, college, back when I was 18, and I ended up not going. I'm actually an autodidact, so I really like learning by doing. I really like teaching myself things. I don't super thrive in a school setting. I'm not great at taking tests, but I love learning,
Yeah.
and so I love inhaling knowledge and being a sponge. So I basically, when after I got the scholarship, I ended up taking a gap year just to kind of try to get work in film. And then I started working in film fairly quickly and have worked really, really hard since then, and never ended up going to school. But that being said, I still really value education, and I did a lot of work at the beginning, working my way up the totem pole and working in lots of different apartments and departments. I think I said apartments, different departments, and and I also have read books and taken some courses here and there, improv, acting classes, writing classes. I've kind of made my own education, and
Yeah.
hope to continue learning forever.
I, I was ultimately just mostly curious just because like this is such a clean piece and like there's so much effort behind this film, and it would have boggled my mind had you not, like, I don't know, that was a perfect explanation ultimately. And to
Thank
wrap
you.
up, because we're running low on time, I guess what I want to ask is, you wear all these hats. The film was fantastic.
Thank
Perfect
you.
way to wrap it up. And for those that haven't seen it, there's room for a sequel. Have you guys talked about that? Have you guys communicated? Has Penn made its way to the paper for that one?
Yes, yes, no. So
Okay.
we've definitely talked about it. We have ideas. If people seem really interested, we absolutely know where we would want to go with that and how we would want it to look and even what we would want to call it. But we haven't actually taken pen to the paper yet. But
Awesome.
threaten us with a good time and we'll be there.
Awesome. Yeah, Jenna, it was fantastic. Like getting to know you. This conversation blew me away. At CineDump, we let the doers know how they're doing, and you are doing just fine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jesse. It was lovely to meet you.